11,000 years ago, something rose from a hilltop in southern Turkey that had no business existing. Massive limestone pillars, some weighing up to 10 tons, carved with extraordinary precision, arranged in vast ceremonial circles by people who, according to everything we thought we knew about human history, should not have been capable of building them. When Grok AI was given unrestricted access to every available dataset on Göbekli Tepe, the archaeology, the ancient DNA, the construction analysis, the geological surveys, it did not simply confirm what conventional science already believed. It found something conventional science had no framework to explain. Every fringe theory collapsed under the genetic evidence. No lost civilization, no outside intelligence, no ghost population hidden in the DNA. But what replaced those theories was, in some ways, stranger. Because what Grock found was not a mystery about who built Göbekli Tepe. It was a mystery about what building it revealed about us. Picture a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, not far from the Syrian border. Dry rolling plains stretch endlessly toward the horizon. And rising from the earth, enormous T-shaped pillars of limestone, some nearly 6 meters tall, each one weighing several tons, arranged in sweeping circular enclosures with 2 even larger pillars standing at the center of each ring like silent guardians. These are not rough, desperate scratchings in stone. They are works of deliberate, practiced artistry. Foxes, vultures, scorpions, wild boar, snakes, and gazelles are carved across the surfaces with a skill and patience that still impresses professional sculptors today. Many of the pillars appear to have arms and hands. Some wear what look like sculpted loincloths. The excavation team believes they were intended to represent human figures. Enormous, faceless men frozen in stone, presiding over something we still do not fully understand. Now consider the timeline, because this is where things become genuinely difficult to absorb. Stonehenge was built around 5,000 years ago, the Great Pyramids of Giza roughly 4,500 years ago. Both are rightly considered among the most astonishing achievements in human history. Göbekli Tepe predates them both by thousands of years. Its oldest layers date back approximately 11,000 years, meaning that by the time the Egyptians were laying the first stones of the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe was already ancient. Think about everything humankind has managed to fit into the last 4,500 years. Ancient Greece, the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the nuclear bomb, the internet. Now triple that span of time and place yourself at the beginning of it. That is how far back those pillars reach. And here's the part that broke archaeology open. At the time those stones were being raised, none of the things we associate with monumental construction existed yet. No domesticated crops, no pottery, no metal tools, no wheeled transport, no writing, no empire, no state. By every conventional marker of what we call civilization, the people responsible for Göbekli Tepe were not supposed to be capable of building Göbekli Tepe. That is not a dramatic exaggeration. That is the precise conclusion the archaeological record forced onto the field when the site became publicly known. And it is the reason Göbekli Tepe did not just update the textbooks, it made them obsolete. In 2024, Grok AI was given unrestricted access to all available data on the site. Every archaeological report, every construction analysis, every ancient DNA study, every geological survey, every proposed explanation, conventional and alternative, mainstream and fringe. The AI was instructed to analyze this material without preconceptions, without commitment to protecting established theories, and without the career consequences that shape what human researchers are willing to conclude in public. What Grock found did not simply challenge the fringe theories that had gathered around Göbekli Tepe for decades. It challenged the conventional ones too. And the place it started, the first anomaly the AI flagged as requiring serious explanation, was the construction itself. Because building those pillars did not just require strength. It required something the official story had consistently underestimated. And that something turns out to be the key to everything. When Grock analyzed the construction requirements at Göbekli Tepe, the first thing the AI established was what the work actually demanded in physical terms. Pillars weighing up to 10 tons, quarried from limestone bedrock, moved uphill across rough and uneven terrain, then raised vertically and positioned within circular enclosures with a surface carving precision that modern sculptors describe as genuinely impressive. No metal tools, no wheeled transport, no draft animals. The conventional explanation had always gestured toward this and moved on. Grock did not move on. The AI ran detailed labor estimates against every available model of prehistoric community size, caloric capacity, and organizational structure. The conclusion was not what the fringe theorists had predicted. The pillars were not impossible to move. They were not evidence of technology beyond human capability. The estimates confirmed that a settled community of a few hundred people with sufficient planning and sustained communal effort could have achieved exactly this. The engineering was not miraculous, but what it required was something far more significant than brute force. It required a level of social organization that the prevailing model of these people simply did not account for. That is the finding Grock flagged. Not that the construction was beyond human capability, but that it was centuries ahead of what the hunter-gatherer model predicted those particular humans were capable of organizing. Then the AI identified something the standard narrative had noted but never adequately explained: the quality decline. Over roughly 1,800 years of continuous building activity at Göbekli Tepe, the craftsmanship did not improve. It deteriorated. The oldest enclosures contain the most technically accomplished stonework, the most refined carvings, the most precisely positioned pillars. As the centuries pass, the work gets progressively less refined until the later structures look almost rudimentary by comparison. This is the opposite of what you would expect from a tradition in development. A civilization learning to build gets better over time. What Grock identified here is the signature of something different. A community working from inherited peak knowledge, executing a tradition they received rather than one they were still developing, and doing so with diminishing fidelity across generations. The AI cross-referenced ethnographic parallels from around the world to establish what was and was not remarkable about the physical achievement itself. The Nias Islanders of Sumatra regularly shifted stone blocks comparable in size to Göbekli Tepe's largest pillars using nothing more than coordinated community labor. On Easter Island, research eventually demonstrated that small teams could move the famous MOI across the landscape in an upright position using ropes alone, effectively walking the statues forward. No lost technology, no outside assistance, just knowledge and coordination applied with patience and precision. The same principle applied at Göbekli Tepe. The labor was achievable, the logistics were manageable. What was not ordinary was the social infrastructure required to organize and sustain it across generations. Grock's conclusion at this stage was precise. No lost civilization was required to explain the construction, no inherited technology from a vanished source. But the community behind those pillars possessed social complexity, organizational capacity, and accumulated knowledge that was far in advance of anything the standard model had credited them with. Which raised the next question. If they were that organized, what exactly were they organizing around? What was this place actually for? The ground itself had already started pushing back before DNA entered the picture, and what it was saying was considerably more interesting than either the fringe theorists or the original archaeological consensus had accounted for. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who devoted the remainder of his professional life to this single site in southeastern Turkey, built his interpretation around a compelling image. Nomadic hunter-gatherers, seasonal visitors, congregating on this hilltop for ritual purposes and then dispersing back into the landscape. It was a clean and persuasive picture. It just did not quite match what the soil was actually full of. Among the most common tools found throughout the site's sediment layers are sickle blades, not dozens of them, tens of thousands. Sickle blades are the signature tool of cereal harvesting, shaped and used specifically for cutting crop stalks close to the ground. Their presence at this scale is not incidental. It is diagnostic. These are not the tools of people occasionally supplementing a hunting diet with a handful of wild seeds. These are the tools of people engaged seriously, repeatedly, and systematically with grain. Alongside the sickle blades are mortars, pestles, and grinding slabs. The processing equipment of people working with plant material at volume. Researcher Laura Dietrich conducted detailed analysis of these tools and confirmed that many showed evidence of use specifically on plants from the family that includes barley and wheat. The picture building from the artifact record was not one of nomadic ritual visitors passing through. It was one of people with a sustained and serious working relationship with the land around them. The animal bones tell a parallel story. Tens of thousands of butchered remains fill the site's deposits, predominantly gazelle and wild cattle, but also significant numbers of wild sheep showing early signs of the kind of managed interaction that eventually leads to full domestication. Great feasts almost certainly took place here, possibly ritual ones, on a scale that would have required serious logistical organization to sustain. You do not feed that many people across that many generations by accident. The architecture adds yet another layer. The large circular enclosures were almost certainly roofed rather than open air, making their interiors dark, enclosed, and deliberately atmospheric spaces. Smaller structures within the broader complex bear a striking resemblance to permanent dwellings, the kind built by people who intended to stay rather than pass through. More recent excavations have since uncovered morphologically domesticated cereal grains at the site itself, strengthening the case considerably. And then there is the construction timeline read from a different angle. 20 or more separate buried enclosures, each built over or around the last, across 1,800 years of activity. This is not a place people visited. This is a place a community returned to, generation after generation, for longer than the entire span of recorded human history. The picture that emerges from all of this is not of hunter-gatherers pausing between migrations. It is of a community deeply embedded in a landscape, working it, managing it, and standing at the very threshold of one of the most consequential transitions in all of human history: the shift from following food to growing it. Archaeology had established this much. Then ancient DNA arrived, and what it said changed the entire frame. For most of human history, the dead kept their secrets. Whatever stories they carried, where they came from, who their ancestors were, how far they had traveled, all of it disappeared with them into the earth. Then in the last 2 decades, ancient DNA changed that completely. Scientists learned to extract and sequence genetic material from bones thousands of years old, from teeth and inner ear structures where biological material survives longest. Suddenly, the past began to speak in an entirely new language. Not the language of objects and soil layers and tool types, but the language of biology itself. And what that language revealed about the people of Göbekli Tepe was not what anyone had predicted. Genetic studies of human remains from across Anatolia, the Levant, and the Zagros Mountains, the arc of land that cradles the Fertile Crescent, revealed something that nobody had quite anticipated. These populations, living in close geographic proximity, were genetically quite distinct from one another. The Anatolian farmers, the group most directly connected to the Göbekli Tepe region, carried a specific ancestral signature unlike their neighbors to the east and south. These were not a single interchangeable mass of prehistoric people moving uniformly across a landscape. They were distinct communities with deep separate histories, developing largely in parallel across the same broad region over thousands of years. This matters enormously for the lost civilization argument, and Grock applied the test directly. If some advanced founding population had swept through this region, teaching its inhabitants to quarry stone, organize labor, and carve animals with practiced hands, their genetic fingerprint would be embedded in the DNA of the people who came after. There would be a signal, some anomalous ancestry, some inexplicable genetic contribution from a population that did not belong, a ghost in the genome that pointed toward an outside source. There is none. The DNA shows no hidden founders, no ghost population, no mysterious influx of outside ancestry coinciding with the rise of Göbekli Tepe. The builders were the direct descendants of people who had lived in this region for thousands of years before the first pillar was ever raised. The continuity is unbroken and unambiguous. Whatever knowledge went into those carved stones did not arrive from outside. It grew here, accumulated here, passed from generation to generation by people whose bones were already in this ground long before the first enclosure took shape. Grock's assessment of what this means for the fringe theories was unambiguous. Every alternative explanation, the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the lost pre-Holocene civilization, the comet impact survivors carrying forbidden knowledge, every one of them rests on a single unspoken assumption: that the people of the ancient Near East were not intelligent enough, not organized enough, not sophisticated enough to have done this themselves. The DNA does not simply challenge that assumption, it dismantles it at the genetic level. The genetics also confirmed the complicated economic picture the archaeology had already suggested. Populations in the process of transitioning toward agriculture, not sudden farmers, not pure foragers. Communities moving through exactly the kind of gradual, generationally slow shift that the sickle blades and grinding stones and managed animal bones had already implied. But the DNA did not just tell Grock who built Göbekli Tepe. It told Grock where those people went next. And that is where the story becomes personal. The Anatolian farmer lineage did not stay put. That is perhaps the most quietly astonishing thing the DNA revealed. Not just who these people were, but where they went and what they carried with them when they left. As agriculture spread westward across the following millennia, the people of this region moved with it. Not as a single dramatic migration, not as a conquest or an invasion, but as a slow generational expansion, communities pushing gradually into new territory, bringing their seeds, their animals, their accumulated knowledge, and their genes, moving the way people move when the land ahead looks promising, and the memory of the place behind them is already beginning to fade. By the time this movement had run its course, the Anatolian farmer lineage had become one of the primary ancestral sources for the population of modern Europe. This is not a metaphor or an approximation, it is what the genetics show directly. Modern Europeans carry a substantial portion of their biological heritage from exactly this source, from exactly these people, the ones who gathered on that hilltop in southeastern Turkey, who harvested wild barley with tens of thousands of sickle blades, who managed wild sheep toward domestication, who raised towering limestone pillars without the wheel or metal or any of the things we associate with civilizational capability. Sit with that for a moment. The builders of those carved enclosures are not a footnote in human history. They are not a mysterious, vanished people sealed off from us by the distance of 11,000 years. In the most literal biological sense, for a significant portion of humanity alive right now, they are family. When you look at those pillars, the foxes and vultures and scorpions rendered in limestone with patient and practiced hands, you are not necessarily looking at the work of strangers. You may be looking at something made by people whose genes flow through you directly. The distance of 11,000 years collapses into something far more immediate when you frame it that way, and it makes the question of what drove these people to build something so extraordinary feel considerably more personal than any alternative theory ever managed to make it. The DNA also lends unexpected weight to the idea that consumed Klaus Schmidt for his entire career. His most provocative claim, the one that sent shockwaves through archaeology when he first advanced it, was that the temple preceded the farm, that the organizational and spiritual impulse behind Göbekli Tepe came before the agricultural revolution rather than after it. The genetic evidence, read alongside the archaeology, suggests he was right. The populations of this region were already socially complex, already coordinating large communal projects, already managing wild animals and harvesting cereals before domestication was fully established. The social infrastructure came first. The farming followed. This inverts the story we have long told ourselves about how civilization develops. The standard model runs: surplus food enables leisure, leisure enables thought, thought enables religion and monument building. Göbekli Tepe, and now the DNA that speaks for its builders, suggests the opposite sequence is equally possible. That the hunger to build something sacred, something shared, something larger than any single life, may itself be a driver of civilization rather than its product. Klaus Schmidt died in July 2014. He never saw the full weight of genetic confirmation fall behind the theory he had spent decades defending. He was right about the most important thing. He just did not live quite long enough to watch the science prove it. Grock's overall conclusion was precise. The conventional explanation for Göbekli Tepe was not wrong, but it was radical, incomplete. It had answered the question of whether ancient humans could build this place while failing entirely to answer the question of what it meant that they did. And those are not the same question. The AI identified 3 findings that conventional archaeology had consistently underweighted. The first was the causal sequence. The social complexity implied by the construction predates agriculture rather than following from it. This reverses the assumed direction of the relationship entirely. Civilization was not the condition that made Göbekli Tepe possible. Göbekli Tepe, or something like the impulse behind it, may have been the condition that made civilization possible. The second finding was the genetic continuity, unbroken, unambiguous, no outside intervention, no inherited knowledge from a lost source, no ghost population seeding the region with capabilities its inhabitants could not have developed alone. The cognitive capacity, the organizational sophistication, the imaginative reach required to conceive and execute those carved enclosures was already present in people whose ancestors had lived in this landscape for thousands of years before the first stone was raised. It was always there. It never needed to arrive from somewhere else. The third finding was perhaps the most quietly radical. Göbekli Tepe is not a monument to a vanished people. It is genetically, biologically, directly ancestral to much of the world alive today. The site is not a sealed chapter in a closed book. It is the opening passage of a story that is still being written in the DNA of living human beings. Grock then turned to the fringe theories directly and dismantled them not with ridicule but with evidence. The Anunnaki hypothesis. The Watchers. The lost pre-Holocene civilization destroyed by a comet impact around 13,000 years ago. 2 researchers had even claimed that one of Göbekli Tepe's pillars functioned as an astronomical chart, recording the precise date of that cosmic disaster, a reading that required the builders to have mapped the same constellations the ancient Greeks would develop 9,000 years later. Every one of these theories, beneath their surface differences, shared the same foundation. The assumption that the people of the ancient Near East were simply not capable of this, not intelligent enough, not organized enough, not fully human enough to have achieved something extraordinary without outside assistance. The evidence says otherwise, consistently and completely. Grock cross-referenced the capabilities of late Pleistocene and early Holocene people against the fringe assumptions and found the gap between them to be fictional. Mesolithic people from Franchi Cave in Greece were regularly sailing open Mediterranean waters out of sight of land to harvest deep water, tuna, and source obsidian from the island of Melos. The first humans to reach Australia crossed more than 90 kilometers of open ocean 40,000 years ago. 29,000 years before Göbekli Tepe's first stone was raised. These were not people who needed outside help to accomplish remarkable things. They were problem solvers of the highest order, operating without institutional scaffolding and consistently achieving things that still impress us today. With only a fraction of the site excavated, Göbekli Tepe is almost certainly not finished rewriting history. Whatever remains buried beneath that limestone hill will not require a lost civilization to explain it. It will require something harder to accept. a complete revision of what we believed ordinary human beings were capable of. Göbekli Tepe is often described as the world's oldest temple, but that framing undersells what this place actually represents. It is not just a monument, it is a threshold, the moment preserved in stone where something fundamental shifted in the human story. What Grok AI's analysis revealed was not gods, aliens, or a vanished master race standing behind those pillars. It revealed people. Specific, traceable, entirely human people whose story did not end on that hilltop, but traveled westward across millennia, flowing into the ancestry of much of the world alive today. With only a fraction of the site excavated, the hill is almost certainly not finished with us yet. Whatever is still buried beneath that limestone was put there by people who needed no outside hand to achieve something extraordinary. They looked at a hilltop and imagined something no one had ever built. Then they built it,